Hello, everyone. Mike's MMA Picks here, checking in the aftermath of UFC 273, where we saw a number of title fights that really were shockers in some regards, but also were not surprises by some. We learned a lot about a number of fighters here. We're going to work our way through the card. We'll talk a little bit about a few of the controversial decisions that took place. Some say they were not controversial. I'd like to hear some of your professional opinions regarding that subject. And a few takeaways from this fight. We'll start with the first bout of the evening, where we had Julio Arce, who defeated Daniel Santos. Now, when we watch weigh-ins, we saw Julio Arce was able to miss weight, looked horrific on the scale. The line closed a little bit. I think a lot of people thought that may have an impact on the fight, and in some regards, it may have. But Julio Arce, how impressive was his footwork inside of that octagon? Looked phenomenal out there. Daniel Santos plodding forward throughout the fight and just could not track down Julio Arce. Julio Arce's head movement on point. That jab was something to behold. Very, very impressive performance by Julio Arce. Gets back on track in the bantamweight division. Impressive. And Daniel Santos, UFC debut, came in on relatively short notice here. And what can you say? Shoot a box fighter who is a wild man in there. I'd like to find out who folks are interested in Daniel Santos facing next. But a few takeaways here. Julio Arce, we talked about that weight cut, how that was a potential issue here. And this is another situation where you don't necessarily win the fight on the scale, win or lose the fight on the scale. So we shouldn't be putting too much stock into the weigh-ins. And here we go. Adam is saying that Volk Zombie fight doesn't go the distance, saved you. Congratulations, Adam. Nice hit on your part. By the way, Volkanovski, how dialed in did he look last night? Very, very impressive. We'll get to Volkanovski's performance in a little while, where he, the way he fought last night, he could have taken out 3 featherweight fighters. He was teeing off on Korean Zombie. I'm surprised that Zombie's corner didn't end up throwing in the towel there. That was very impressive. So we'll continue our way up and down the card here. Chat a little bit about Piera Rodriguez and her performance against Kay Hansen. She defeated Kay Hansen via unanimous decision. And a lot of folks were banking on Kay Hansen using her weight advantage to end up establishing top position and holding Piera Rodriguez down. That was not the case here. Piera Rodriguez had a great gas tank, was able to cause Kay Hansen some problems on the mat, was landing takedowns of her own. And you look in Kay Hansen's resume yesterday, we spoke about Kay Hansen having a 7-6 overall record now. Difficult to back somebody like Kay Hansen in that spot. I think the weight miss could have potentially helped her there. Imagine if she had to cut those extra 2 pounds. I believe she weighed in at 118 pounds. So she came in overweight, lost the fight, now has lost back-to-back fights. Actually, 3 fights in a row, right? So questionable situation for her. She is only 22 years of age, so she has career in front of her that could potentially get on track, but wouldn't surprise me to see her end up in Invicta. I'd be interested to know how long her UFC contract is for. Marcus, energy in the arena was off the charts. Piero Rodriguez winning against Kay Hansen at those odds. You did. Great hit there. Marcus, I was able to see the pictures that you posted on Twitter of your seats and the fighters you were able to meet. Looked like a phenomenal time. I'd like to get out to a card at some point, preferably an international card. That would be something I'd look forward to. I know we've spoken about having a international MMA bettors retreat. I would love to be a part of that at some point. And I've seen fights through a number of organizations. I'll say this from in front of my TV, the Tamayev Burns fight looked like and sounded like there was mayhem going on in that crowd. Very, very impressive. Also, shout out to Z with the odds mug here. One of the good guys in the industry. So Marcus, great to hear back from you. Hope you have a safe journey home. And hell of a fight yesterday. Hell of a fight card for that matter. Some statements were definitely made out there. So Piero Rodriguez, impressive performance now, still unblemished record on her behalf, right? She is working her way here, still only 29 years of age. I liked what I saw as far as aggression goes. I also liked what I heard from her corner. She has a bright future. So looking forward to seeing her at 115 pounds, seeing where she ends up. And as far as Kay Hansen goes, where does Kay Hansen go from here? Realistically, it's a, I think she may get the axe. It depends on her contract situation. All right, here's an interesting fight where we have Alexei Olnik, who was able to take Jared Vanderaa out with another submission victory. We saw that coming yesterday, and Vanderaa showed some rather questionable fight IQ. They're following Alexei Olnik to the ground, and the old vet still has some tricks up his sleeve. It's amazing. Alexei Olnik, only a year older than me, and he has, this guy has been through so many wars inside of the octagon and in other promotions, has fought some tremendous fighters, and still has it to defeat some of the heavyweight fighters out there. Let's see. Evan says he regrets his bet on Kay Hansen. Well, challenging times. Alexei Olnik, though, the way he was able to take care of Jared Vanderaa so quickly, he's able to lock up submissions just when you think, you think you're safe and you're entering a fighter's guard, or you're reminiscent of Paul Craig. He lures you into a false sense of security. And oh man, what is this? Vanderaa is certainly one of the heavyweight fighters of all time. Well, he does weigh 266 pounds, right? He was cutting to 266 pounds. It's amazing how you look at Olnik, 44 years of age, still keeps himself in great shape. And the guy says that he has another 5 to 10 years in the tank ready to go. I'd be skeptical of that legitimately taking place. Maybe another year or so. Adam took the under. Nice call. And Olnik, where does he go from here? I'd like to see him match up against a striker here in the heavyweight division. It'd be interesting to see where he ends up. And then Jared Vanderaa Granted, he came in on short notice, so he'll probably stick around. He's lost a number of fights inside the distance, though, and that litmus test that we've talked about is Andre Arlovski, right? Andre Arlovski is a fighter who, if you can pass that test, then you can stick around in the division. And as far as there's a fight coming up, Jake Collier against Andre Arlovski. It's amazing how Andre Arlovski has the ability to lure opponents into fighting his style of fight. I'll be interested to see if he's able to do that with Jake Collier, who's on the rise here. Marcus says his first live event was UFC 213, and he saw Olnick submit Travis Brown. Yeah, that fight IQ, the in-fight decision-making was definitely on display in that matchup. And up and down this card, this is something that we also need to consider, that we're backing our hard-earned money is backing the decision-making of fighters inside of the octagon. We'll get into a fight in the near future in this breakdown or this aftermath, where we'll talk about a fighter who had the tools to win, but just did not utilize them in Aspen Led. But we'll continue up and down this breakdown here. So we have Mike Malott, who was able to defeat Mickey Gall via first round TKO. Impressive performance by Mike Malott to some degree, but also Mickey Gall was able to have a lot of early success there. It's amazing how tuned in the broadcast was, especially Dean Thomas, about Mickey Gall's striking defense, that his offense is on point, but that he was leaving his chin up on a platter, and he kind of smelled blood out there, hurt Mike Malott. Mike Malott was bleeding, and Malott backed against the cage. Mickey Gall tried to close distance, and boom, ended up getting caught with, I believe, a left hand, and then face planted. Oh man, that was rough to see, but happy for Mike Malott there. And also interesting to see that the guy's only making $10,000 to show and $10,000 to win. Glad to hear Dana White was able to match his donation to a charity in the post-fight speech. We heard a little bit about that. So Mike Malott, he was a bit of an unknown headed into this bout. Not much footage on him. Ended up passing the test against Mickey Gall, but Mickey Gall, where does he go from here too? This is a guy who against Morono came up short, wasn't pulling the trigger, and then all of a sudden starts pulling the trigger against Malott and gets knocked out. So is he going to come out gun shy again? Tried to go to the grappling, but wasn't able to really get anything going there. Interesting spot. Yeah, the old 10-10 contract. Amazing at this stage in the game how that's still a thing. Next up, we'll discuss a little bit about Raquel Pennington against Aspen Led. Raquel Pennington took this fight on, I believe, 9 days' notice. Ended up getting into a striking affair with Aspen Led. Aspen Led, very questionable game plan. Was not showing much in the way of head movement. Was not looking to take the fight to the ground until the third round, where she immediately had success in the clinch, and then was able to find the back once Raquel Pennington was standing, and wasn't able to do much with it. It is It's fascinating to watch Aspen Led's corner, the way they're able to try to work with her, and unsuccessfully. I question also, this is a situation now where we are looking at a fighter who is deteriorating when they're not fighting to their strengths. Another example of us backing a fighter to make smart decisions inside of the octagon. And I own up to this. We had a 1 unit play on Aspen Led plus 160, and she waited too long to get going. Raquel Pennington, tough as nails, was able to put it on Aspen Led the first couple of rounds, win those rather decisively. And then Aspen Led just not fighting to her strengths. It's amazing. Macy Chason was able to take Raquel Pennington down and put her into tough spots. And Aspen Led showed she could do it in the third round, but where was that? She had the cardio to do this. She just got finished fighting a 5-rounder, and nope, no dice with Raquel Pennington getting the victory there. We saw Lad weigh in. She made weight, but it wasn't. Again, weigh-ins do not win you the fight. You got to get in there, and Raquel Pennington typically fights hard for your money, and we've seen her against even the champ getting brutalized. And, she hung in there and took a hellacious beating, but she will fight hard. So interesting spot there. I don't know where Aspen Lad goes from here. I don't think she's going to get away from that team and find a new camp, to be honest. I don't know what she's going to end up doing, but from here on out, she's a fighter who, until something big changes, you can't necessarily back her unless they put her up against some can out there. Interesting. Next up, we had Anthony Hernandez taking on Josh Frem. Josh Frem came in on short notice and was able to cause big problems early. Was difficult to put away. Hernandez came out like a ball of fire. Was landing takedowns, was getting caught at range against Frem. Was in the fight. Both of these fighters were in the fight for the first couple of rounds, and then you saw the gas tank, the wilting on behalf of Josh Frem. Vince Pichel's teammate. Again, you talk about the in-fight decision-making, the third round from Vince Pichel to go to the wrestling and try to take Mark Madsen down in the third round. Interesting when he had a Mark Madsen who was fading, but he looked to initiate the grappling there, and that caused some problems. But back to this fight, Anthony Hernandez showed a decent gas tank, was running through so many different chokes, trying to submit Josh Frem, and was unable to do so. I want to see Josh Frem on a full camp. We got to get this guy another fight. Hopefully he came out of this bout unscathed and was able to continue on here. UFC seems like he has a very bright future. Still a young guy, has a bright future ahead of him. Hernandez, though, was put in some serious trouble against the short notice opponent. Next up, we're going to discuss Ian Garry taking on Darien Weeks. Ian Garry was able to, this guy comes out with so much hype, was able to defeat Darien Weeks via unanimous decision, but left a lot to be desired in the way of killer instinct, just fighting an opponent like Darien Weeks. Darien Weeks was sitting at the end of his range and wasn't able to, Garry was not able to find much success there. Weeks did not want to necessarily get to the grappling. Adam, Darien Weeks was your underdog pick of the week. Well, the first round was very competitive. The second round, not so much. And then the third round, we saw Darien Weeks take over here and cause Weeks some problems. You can't just stand there in front of Ian Garry, a fighter who fights and uses his length very well. We didn't get to see Ian Gary's ground game, but he has a ground game on him. And as far as Weeks goes, I mean, this is a fighter who took Brian Barberena to the limit, was unable to get much done in this spot. I'll be interested to see where they end up going as far as Darien Weeks goes. And as far as Ian Gary goes, oh, let's see, man. There's so many different matchups out there. It seems like they're trying to do a slow build here, similar to Sean O'Malley here. I doubt Ian Gary's team is going to accept a step up in competition. We'll see how that plays out. Now, interesting fight that we had between Mark Madsen and Vince Pichel. Mark Madsen came in and he found some success early as far as the leg kicks go. I was impressed with, I got to be honest. I wasn't impressed with much of Madsen's game. He chose to strike, and I think that was why he was able to conserve some of his gas tank. And Madsen ends up landing leg kicks on Pichel. Pichel's tough as nails, right? Was having success on the feet. Granted, lost the first round, right? Second round, you started to see Vince Pichel landing at range, finding success. Madsen was caught at the end of Pichel's punches. And then Madsen went back to the third round. Madsen gets caught in exchange wrestling, and Pichel tries to go for a takedown, and it doesn't work out for him. Madsen ends up on top, and the third round evaporates. The third round just evaporates, basically, with Madsen on top. And you know what? I tweeted this maybe about 2 or 3 months ago that burning clock in the top position is underrated, right? And it's a skill when you're watching tape to avoid the stand up, right? You have to be able to be proactive when you're in someone's guard and try to pass, try to advance position, stay active so the referee doesn't stand you up. And Madsen was able to do that. It was very interesting to hear Pichel try to work his way back to the feet using his words to get the ref to initiate a stand up, and just wasn't happening. So our play in that spot was Vince Pichel, no scorecards, no action. So if it hits the scorecards, it's a push. If Pichel wins inside the distance, it would have won. And if Mark Madsen won inside the distance, it would have lost. So props to those who are on the Mark Madsen via decision prop there. Close fight, very, very close fight. Marcus says he picked Madsen to win, but he doesn't move the needle for me. I didn't understand why Vince Pichel tried to grapple with Madsen in the later rounds instead of keeping the fight standing. I think that was an ego thing where he felt like he wanted to prove a point. And granted, he did take Madsen down, so that's nice to see. But, oh, man, that's a fight that Pichel could have won. Now, so look at this. So Madsen stays undefeated, right? He stays undefeated, and he is a fighter who's he going to get next? I know Arman Sarukian has a matchup tentatively booked. It hasn't officially been booked, but oh, man, if you want to talk about a fight that ends up on the refrigerator, if you book Mark Madsen against Arman Sarukian, that fight is going on the fridge. I would wholeheartedly jump on board, and that would be a max bet opportunity for Arman Sarukian. Put that out there if they ever book that. But We'll see. We'll see. Odds makers have, or the matchmakers have some interesting plans, and sometimes we don't know what they are until the fights get announced. So we'll see about that. Next up, we have a controversial fight. Mackenzie Dern, who defeated Tecia Torres via split decision. You watched the first round was toss up. A lot of folks felt like Dern, by landing the heavier strikes, took the first round. Some folks thought that the kicking game, the side kicks from from Tecia Torres, won her that round. Interesting. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are about the Tecia Torres fight here. Now, she hung in there second round. How about her surviving, getting put in some really tough positions against Mackenzie Dern? Avoided the submissions. Very impressed with Tecia Torres to avoid the submission in that spot. And then also to win the third round against Mackenzie Dern. It looked like she was almost like a gazelle trying to stay at range, similar to the way Edson Barbosa tends to evade. Barbosa will sometimes dance around the outskirts of the cage to catch his breath, and Tecia Torres was trying to do that. She ended up winning the round. Those side kicks ended up keeping her in this fight. And then we headed to the scorecards, where we saw Mackenzie Dern win via split decision. Now, personally, I thought that fight could have gone either way. I didn't have a dog in the fight, and I just personally watching Tecia Torres fight, I'm not a fan of her fighting style, and I know that she has a tendency to win via decision, and we've seen her brutalized in the past by Jessica Andrade and others, where she has bulked up the physique, but it hasn't necessarily helped her much. So she takes another loss here, and Mackenzie Dern gets back on track. Now, Evan says, the third round for Tecia, she avoided the fight at all costs. Optics were always going to favor Dern. Yes, and we'll talk later about optics and closing distance, especially when we talk about the Petr Yan Sterling fight. That first round, how much stock do you put into Petr Yan stalking his prey in that first round? And that round did not end up going to him. Interesting to see how that one was scored, and also the uproar on Twitter about that specific fight. We'll get to that. We're going to talk to that about that fight at length in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about Hamzat Tamayev against Gilbert Burns. This is a fighter who, in Tamayev, came in with a load of hype behind him, similar to Ian Gary, except this Tamayev, the hype has been off the charts for a long time, and in my eyes, he did live up to the hype here, fighting a Gilbert Burns, who we know Gilbert Burns is tough, has nails. Gilbert Burns was dropped by a jab early in the fight. These two fighters ended up going to absolute war in in all three rounds. Chimaev's shown that he has a hell of a chin on him. That's, you know what? I'm going to say this too, that the stock of Chimaev is actually going up. This is the first time we saw Chimaev get tested, and he passed this test with flying colors, was able to win the third round against Gilbert Burns, who we knew had great cardio and could go deep into fights. Both of these fighters hurt very, very badly. Both of these fighters had to dig deep. It's not like Gilbert Burns is a top, he's like out of the top 15 as at welterweight. He's a legitimate contender at the welterweight division. And the key here is that one takeaway, I was shocked. This is mind-boggling to see this fight end up hitting the scorecards. I suspected that one of these fighters would end up on the canvas unconscious, and it did not happen. There were many opportunities for it to happen. Both of these fighters got hit with the kitchen sink. Chimaev has shown that he can fight at range. That uppercut was causing Gilbert Burns problems. Gilbert Burns survived, stayed in the fight. It's interesting, though. I was seeing folks who've stated on Twitter that they believe Gilbert Burns won that fight. I don't know how that's possible. I saw it as being somewhat competitive, but Chimaev won that fight. Gilbert Burns is a warrior. Now, Chimaev, I still believe that he is the real deal in this spot and that his stock ends up going up. I think he's going to continue to cause problems in this division and also at middleweight. You saw that once a fighter loses their undefeated record, they have to sit with that loss for months, right? Us as MMA handicappers, we sit with the loss for even a week. Sometimes that's tough. That's tough to sit with. Even for me, right? We had a 5-unit loss this week, and this was the largest loss that I've personally had in a long, long time, over a year. So to sit with this and have it marinate, we have to take the emotions out of it. But for a fighter to sit with a loss for months, that can light a fire under a fighter's ass. We know Chimaev, he won this fight, but he was tested, and we saw some chinks in the armor. And I think that those chinks in the armor ended up being because of his own the way he sees himself as being invincible. Now he knows that he isn't invincible. And I think we're going to see a little bit of a more measured approach next time out for Chimaev. And I honestly believe that he has a shot against Kamaru Usman. I don't think that Kamaru Usman is a pound for pound top fighter at the in the sport. I think that he's shown that he can be beaten. We've seen Colby almost get it done a couple of times, and we've seen Gilbert Burns almost take out Kamaru Usman. And if you make that fight, that Chimaev Kamaru Usman fight, we might get some dog odds. We'll see. Marcus, you were in the building for Conor versus Khabib, and you could tell us that Khamzat versus Burns had the same energy. Interesting. Khamzat versus Covington. Interesting. I think they'd probably line that at evens, to be honest. I think we would probably get evens. Wouldn't surprise me. And then where would it be bet? I bet Chimaev would end up the betting favorite against Colby Covington, to be honest. I think that that's what would happen. Would be interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned the Conor Khabib, that you're in the building for that fight. I think as far as electricity in the building, Dan Henderson against Vanderlei Silva. I was at that fight for Pride Fighting Championships back in 2007, and that fight had an electricity that was second to none. First of all, at the Thomas and Mack Center, they had the stereo, the sound system was blaring so loud that you could barely hear yourself during the opening ceremony throughout the entirety of the card. Oh wow. Jan against Sterling. How would we line a trilogy? I think that in that spot, Jan would still get the respect from the odds makers in the betting window. We would see Sterling as an underdog, probably about minus 160, minus 180 Jan. I think that's what we would see it lined at from the odds makers, but we'll see. We'll see how that ends up. If they end up booking a trilogy, which I think they should. And when let's get right into this fight. By the way, Aljo walks away with the belt, and interesting to see that they have TJ Dillashaw wanting to get right in there. I don't want to see Dillashaw get that title shot. As far as I'm concerned, he should have been railroaded out of the sport after the EPO. It's amazing how he's so close to a title here again after arguably losing against Corey Sandhagen. I thought he lost that fight against Sandhagen. So we have Aljo taking on Petr Yan. This is a fight that was very controversial to some as far as the decision goes, but you look at the rounds. I did have a chance to watch back the fight footage of this bout that took place in the first round. It's very interesting how folks, you understand the judging criteria, right? How the optics of a fighter being aggressive is supposed to take a back seat. This goes back to the Justin Scoggins versus Saeed Nurmega Medov fight. I always think of that fight. You had Nurmega Medov was the aggressor, and Scoggins was staying evasive and landing the better shots, but the judges ended up giving that fight to Saeed Nurmega Medov. And in this fight, you saw Aljo being evasive, using his footwork in the first round, trying to land kicks and keep Petr Yan at bay. Petr Yan putting a little bit more on his strikes than he typically would. That first round, very interesting how that was scored. I personally, I thought that upon the first time I watched it, Petr Yan, I thought he took that first round ever so slightly. I don't hate on folks giving that first round to Sterling, but neither fighter did a lot in that round. Interesting. Yeah, they gave Sandhagen the interim title shot after that TJ loss. Yeah, right? It's interesting how this sport works. So the second round, we saw Aljo land that takedown, right? The smile, establishing that body lock. That is something that really caused Petr Yan fits. You heard his corner ask him, do not give him your back under any circumstances. And he ended up doing it again in the third round. So Sterling, dominant rounds, right? He was able to land a little bit of ground and pound. Didn't see much of a submission attempt. This was a fight where we had a unit and a half on the fight not going the distance at minus 105 that ended up crashing. Though this fight, I still look at this fight as having the potential to finish, considering not only the first bout ended up finishing, but also in this spot, Aljo, he had the chance to sink in that choke and he didn't commit to it. He was content riding the rounds out and not really emptying his tank. And we saw why he did that too, because the fourth and fifth round, he ended up giving those up rather convincingly. Aljo lost round 4, round 5, won rounds 2 and 3. Now, were those rounds 2 and 3, were those 10-8 rounds? That is the question. Personally, I watched that. I see positionally, yes, that was a very dominant round. Both of those were dominant rounds. Though, what was he able to do with that? What was he able to do with those positions? He was able to hold another human being down against their will and control them, but he wasn't able to land much damage. Petr Yan came out of that bout completely unscathed, was the much fresher fighter in rounds 4 and 5. And as far as the decision goes, I don't have any problem with Aljo getting the decision. I had no dog in that fight. If it hit the scorecards, I was actually hoping that Sterling got the victory, because nice to see a hometown guy get the victory, and also a big fan of Matt Serra and Ray Longo and everything that they've been able to do. Though I went back and watched it, and it would not surprise me if I saw a draw, because I thought that one of those rounds could have been a 10-8 round. And then I was wondering if that first round, if Yan ended up winning that first round on some of the scorecards. Very, very interesting fight. Now, props to Aljo. Excited for him. He is a guy who will fight hard for your money. He's a great ambassador of the sport. He gets people going, gets people riled up. Everybody loves engaging with him, because he can be a clown at some points in time. But Petr Yan, much fresher fighter. If that fight went to a 6th round, which, I mean, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, right? If that fight went any longer, Petr Yan would have taken over. Now, the gas tank, you look at the energy exertion of Sterling. I love the way he paced himself in this bout. The first round stayed evasive. Second round got to the grappling. Third round got to the grappling. Fourth round lost. Fifth round ended up trying to get his grappling going, but he didn't have much left, and he barely made it across the finish line. You saw there were almost like two bulls colliding. Their arms were so spent from all the grappling that was taking place. And Yan, positionally, it was interesting. He was willing to engage with Sterling on the ground rather than let him back to his feet and go for the kill. But the thing is, how much did he have left in his arms? It looked like he had some, but very, very close fight, split decision. No problem with Aljo winning that fight, though. It's interesting seeing folks take victory laps here over an Aljo win. Now, you look at the odds, right? The odds here, Aljo was a massive underdog in this spot. So happy for folks who were able to cash those tickets on Aljamain Sterling. But as if it was a definitive win. No, that wasn't a definitive win. This fight should be run back for a third time, to be honest. I'd love to see this fight happen a third time. And as far as the fight ending up going the distance, not shocked. Not shocked. But I thought that it would have finished. I thought that either Aljo was going to commit to the grappling early, or Yan was going to pick him apart late and get the stoppage. Didn't happen, and we move on to the next card. But interesting spot there, and congrats to those who were able to cash those Aljo tickets. Cheers. Does Sterling's improved performance and physique suggest performance enhancing drug use? No, I don't think so. You look up and down his resume and the way he was able to come into the UFC. The guy's always been had a tremendous physique. He's a great fighter, and he's able to use his length on the ground, and he fights to his strengths. So very happy for Aljo in that spot. I don't think this was a robbery. If you ask me who won the fight, I do think that Petr Yan edged it out, but I don't think this was a robbery at all. And Actually, you know what? If you ask me how I judge this fight, I think it's a draw, to be honest. That second round could have been a 10-8, and I had that first round for Jan. So I believe this fight should have been a draw, but happy for Aljo bringing the belt back to Long Island. Always nice to see that. Wow, Marcus, you want to see Merab against Petr Yan? That would be a hell of a fight. As far as gas tanks go, you know that that Merab, the machine, can go and go and go. Now let's talk a little bit about the main event of the evening, where we had Alex Volkanovski basically destroying Korean Zombie. This may go down as one of the most impressive championship performances of all time. Almost flawless. You watch, this was reminiscent of Forrest Griffin against Anderson Silva, except this one lasted much longer, and Korean Zombie's chin held up for a long, long time. This fight, I swear, Volkanovski probably could have knocked out 3 other featherweights in the time he had out there against Zombie. Zombie is an opponent tough as nails. Chan Sung Jung fighting out of a great camp and fight ready. Now, let's see. Why do you think Sterling didn't commit to the low kicks? He had success in the first round. Good question. Good question. A lot of comments coming in here about the Volkanovski spot. Yeah. Volkanovski, I believe he was a minus 730 betting favorite heading into this card. Interesting how his inside the distance line could be had, I believe, at plus money. So Volkanovski, he's able to land heavy punches, and the cardio's there, the fight IQ is there, the game plan is there. He's there were some concerns when Volkanovski when Korean Zombie wouldn't go away. You know, there are some fighters who you end up emptying your tank on and they're still there. And then what do? You know, then the tides turn. I thought that could potentially happen because Zombie's such a great counter striker, but Volkanovski did not let Korean Zombie get off the hook here. Chris says he just got back from the woods camping. Shocked to see Aljo and Chimaev fight go the distance. Yeah, I was I was shocked to see those as well. More so the Chimaev Burns fight. Believe it or not, we got in at minus 200 for that fight not to go the distance. Ended up not cashing, but sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles here. Cejudo alleges he's coming out of retirement to challenge Volkanovski. Interesting. I like that fight, but is Cejudo serious here about this? You know, he fights out of a great camp, that gym off of Shea in Scottsdale. Very familiar with that area. Lived out in Arizona for almost 7 years. So very familiar with that area and the gyms out there, and great camp, great champion. I've backed Volkanovski in just about every one of his UFC fights, and he's won us a lot of money over the years and was able to put on another phenomenal performance here. Now, Korean Zombie, I don't know where he goes from here, to be honest. He just was 2 steps behind Alex Volkanovski in that spot, and you can't show up 2 steps behind the champ and expect to be able to come back and turn the tide against somebody like Volkanovski. Interesting how that played out, and flawless performance by Alex Volkanovski. James, good evening, my friend. You say, do you think this performance by Alexander was as good as the Israel Adesanya versus Costa performance? You know, I think what made it so great was that it lasted longer. So Volkanovski was able to pick his spots, and you saw at one point, I believe it was the beginning of the 4th round, Volkanovski came out and he didn't want to hurt Korean Zombie anymore. He basically was saying, do you want to continue to do this? And I think back to the Moicano RDA fight that took place recently, where RDA basically took his foot off the gas, and that fight ended up going the distance. That's another fight that should have been stopped much earlier than it did. That fight ended up going the distance, actually. So I think this fight could have been stopped much earlier. And the Adesanya Costa fight, I mean, Adesanya is a great fighter. And so Costa, we know Costa's actually, he's pretty darn good. The way he fought Vettori, granted, he needs to get his weight under control, was very impressive going into the later rounds. But I personally, I rank Alex Volkanovski's performance up there. We're going to see highlights of that for years to come. Very, very good stuff out of that fighter. Korean Zombie's too flat-footed and stayed in front of Alex Volkanovski. Yeah, never liked the matchup. You know, it was interesting. I talked to Dennis Bermudez immediately after his fight against Korean Zombie, and we knew Dennis Bermudez, great fighter in his own right, was able to beat Max Holloway. Bermudez, one thing that he ended up getting caught by a counter strike in that bout and had his lights shut off. And I was concerned that Korean Zombie could potentially do something like that when Volkanovski's either when his cardio starts to wane, which it hasn't happened yet, or if he gets too overconfident and his head movement was an issue. But that did not happen. Volkanovski was moving his head off the center line and was showcasing some incredible skills. Does it seem like Weili Zhang has a similar style of Volkanovski in that they use similar low kick strategies? Obviously Zhang is not as skilled, but could she learn from that style? Well, we're going to find out when Weili Zhang takes on former champion Joanna, former champion for that matter. I'm interested to see that fight. I believe that fight takes place in July, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, she is a fighter who that fight ready gets folks prepared. And, you know, I go back and I watch Korean Zombie. Other fighters in that spot would have been out of there a couple of rounds earlier. I don't see many featherweights making it past the second round in that after taking the damage that Volkanovski was able to inflict. But Korean Zombie stayed in there, and even after the fight, seemed to have all of his wits. The guy did not get carried out on a stretcher, and I thought that that was the case, that there would be some medical attention administered to Korean Zombie in that spot. UFC 275, June 11th, Weili Zhang against Joanna, former champion. Interesting. I backed Weili Zhang in that spot. That was a controversial decision. I believe Joanna was the dog in that spot. That caused some controversy on Twitter when Weili Zhang ended up getting the nod in that spot. Great fight, and should be a great rematch. We'll be looking forward to that. So want to thank everybody for joining on board for this look back at UFC 273. Now, this card, I suffered a few unit losses here. So 5-unit loss, biggest loss in over a year, and still up over 97 units in profit, up over 17 units so far this year. And we continue this journey one fight at a time. Going to be continuing to put out breakdowns both before fights, before events, after events, both on this channel as well as the MMAOddsbreaker channel. And want to thank everybody for just engaging on a regular basis here. This is something that I really take a lot of pride in, putting my work out there and looking forward to it. Oh, we got another comment from Marcus here. Can you see a potential teammate versus teammate controversy with Malott becoming a #1 contender? Man, I don't see those two teammates fighting one another. They've got such a tight knit group over there that I don't see that happening. By the way, how amazing is Ray Longo? The guy has done so much for the sport, and also has been able to get these underdogs to hit, and the ability to keep their fighter in the fight and believe in themselves is incredible. Ray Longo, he was able to, I still remember I was at a Buffalo Wild Wings back in 2007 in, I believe it was Glendale, Arizona, when George St. Pierre was upset by Matt Serra. That was incredible. What an incredible event that took place there. Another fight that I wanted to speak a little bit about was the Chris Weidman against Anderson Silva fight. I remember hearing about Chris Weidman that he was coming up, that he was submitting black belts, and that he was doing some great things. Look out for him. He's coming to the UFC, and ended up being everything we thought he was and shocking the world. Incredible fighter, and hopefully he can come back after the horrific. You know what? It wouldn't surprise me to see Weidman end up retiring. Nothing wrong with that. But that one night, though, and the Machida fight that he put on, that was incredible. But talk about Ray Longo and his ability to get these fighters to believe in themselves. Ray Longo was able to help Chris Weidman beat Anderson Silva twice. And then also, now you have Aljo defeating Peorian, who, yes, I considered him to be an elite fighter. And this is a situation where you have a fighter who fought the perfect game plan in Aljo. He had just enough in the tank to get the job done. Very impressive. Very impressive. Mike, how important is it to listen to interviews? Almost as huge as watching film. You know, that is part of the puzzle, James, but it's not a huge piece of the puzzle. Sometimes if it's a fighter who has a track record of saying what they're going to do, doing what they're going to say, following through, being a man of their word, then I would put a little bit more stock into it. But if it's somebody who is going to try something out that you've never seen them do before, you can't trust what you haven't seen. That's one of my mottos. So want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Remember, when you do get your advice, make sure that folks they have a legitimate tracked winning record. There are folks out there putting content out who don't have they put the cart before the horse, and you want to make sure that you're established and that you have a winning track record before you're providing advice to others. So want to take the time to thank everybody for tuning in today. Take one fight at a time, one card at a time. We'll continue to do this throughout the rest of the year and continue this journey. Let's go. Have a great evening, my friends. Thanks for tuning in.